Today we're showing you how to prepare for your next podcast interview. So you have a podcast, you've created incredible cover art, and now it's time to launch. But you need some episodes. And you've been listening, you know that the easiest way to build your influence and build your authority when you have none to begin with, or you have a little bit to begin with, is to bring on guests onto your show and to kind of piggyback on their authority. Well, in this video, that's exactly what we're talking about. First, we're going to start with the high-level structure. Then I'm going to show you our high-impact authority building framework. And at the end of this video, we're going to settle the age-old podcasting debate. Stay tuned. The high-level structure of every podcast episode follows 3 simple steps. First, our intro. Our intro is where we're going to very briefly summarize the parts or the topics that are going to be discussed in the episode. This is for 2 different reasons. 1, when your episode first goes live, you want your people to know what they're getting into. Of course, the title and description of your episode are also going to show this same information. But just like at the beginning of these videos, I tell you exactly what we're talking about in this episode. It's so that you know exactly what you're getting into. On the other hand, it's also fantastic when your episode's been live for a while and people are going back through your archive and looking for very specific topics for their research. This is great, and that they don't have to waste their time listening to episodes that aren't actually serving them value. We want to make sure that they can access our content and our knowledge in as easy of a way as possible. So that's the intro. The second part of every episode is the value, and that's what you're actually sharing in the heart of your episode. So whether you're interviewing a guest, or you're sharing your own knowledge, or you're reporting on something you just learned, whatever it is, make sure that you're actually providing value. Yeah, of course, there are podcasts out there where people just look at their microphone and riff for a while, but we want to create valuable content. We want to create content that people are going to come back to year after year after year because we're providing that type of value. And when you're interviewing someone, it's always a good idea to have that discussion ahead of time so they know what the value points are that we want to make sure that we're hitting so that we create that great, impactful content. The third part of every episode of a podcast always concludes with a call to action. And you've probably heard this a million times before, but if you want your people to actually do something after they listen to your episode, you have to ask them to do it. So at the very easy end of a call to action, you could invite them to subscribe to the podcast. You could ask them to share it with a friend, leave a review. You can ask them to convert platforms and maybe join your Facebook group or check out your YouTube channel. You can ask them to take a step even further and get more intimate with you by providing your email address in exchange for an opt-in, so you can send that call to action over to a landing page or an opt-in page. You can be even more risky and ask them to join one of your programs and actually pay to be part of that level of intimacy. But those I don't do very often. Those I leave for once we've qualified our listeners a little bit more. But every once in a while, I will drop them in. So looking at where in your value ladder your podcast lives, and then what are the other steps that people can join. Talking about joining us, why don't you hit that subscribe button and then you can join us here on the channel, because every week we have tons of new videos for you, helping you build up your influence, your authority, and ultimately your income online. I'm a huge fan of 3-step framework, so I'm going to give you another one. This is our high impact framework that we use not just for our podcasts, but for all sorts of different content. So very simple, this is how we do it. First part is problem. When we're in that value section of our content, we want to make sure that we outline a problem. We want our listeners to relate to that problem and know that, oh, there's actually a solution. We want our listeners to hear that podcast episode at the very beginning. They hear the introduction, and then you're going to go right into explaining the problem. And the problem could be something like they aren't getting enough followers, they aren't getting enough listeners, you're not seeing enough calls being booked in your coaching business, you're not seeing enough students moving through your program, you're not seeing enough students finishing your program after they've started. Whatever that problem is, I want you to irritate it. You're doing this because you want your people to see themselves in that problem. And you're doing it because it sets up the solution, which is our next part. The second part of the framework is information. This is where you're actually helping them understand the why behind the problem. I am a huge fan of not just pointing out that someone has a problem and then giving them a solution. I feel like that is kind of like teaching, giving a man to fish as opposed to teaching a man how to fish. So I prefer to have that information section in where you're giving just enough of the theory behind the scenes or helping them understand the mechanism behind the problem. So if we go back to the example of they don't have enough students finishing their programs that start, for example. This is a problem that I've had over the years. And so the information behind it is, psychologically speaking, if our program isn't gamified, our people are less likely to want to achieve it. When we see this giant obstacle in front of us, this whole big new thing we have to learn and understand, like a new course, that can be really overwhelming, and that overwhelm can actually lead to paralysis, not physical paralysis, mental paralysis. Students get this in their head that it's really difficult to do what you are trying to teach them, and then they don't even start because they don't want to fail. So if you give people that information and help them understand why they've gotten themselves in that problem, you can then transition to the third part of this framework, which is offering a solution or resources. So a solution could be simply follow this simple gamification framework, and then your people will be able to engage on these micro wins all the way up, which will help accumulate, and then they'll get their big win at the end. Or you can provide them resources. You can say, hey, I found it so difficult to communicate with my virtual team. They're spread out around the world, but these 3 resources have really changed the game in our business. And then you list off those resources. That's actually a solution in and of itself, but the way that we present that information is slightly different when it's a resource versus when we provide a logical solution. So that is the high level framework. So let me know if you've ever used this framework before, if you've ever thought of using this framework, or you completely disagree with me. You don't like the theory, you don't want information, you just want solutions. Let me know down in the comments below. All right, so the biggest debate in the podcasting world since the podcasting world began in the early 2000s, to script or not to script? That is the question. And I'm curious, first off, if you script or if you don't script or you follow any of what I'm about to say, I want to know down in the comments. So there's 3 different schools of thought, I guess, 3 different teams that you might fall into. So the first team are those who script. And some of these podcasts sound absolutely incredible. They are so full, densely full of information, because they're literally scripted out. There's a lot of true crime podcasts I've been listening to lately definitely are following the scripting method. The other method, or the second method, is to simply write bullet points and to riff, to just kind of talk, kind of like what we're doing right now. We have an idea of where we're going, but that we want it to feel a lot more organic. This is usually a lot more story-based, a little bit more conversational, and it can have tons of great information in it, but it's not necessarily as packed full as some of those scripted episodes can be. Now, the risk of a scripted episode is sounding like a scripted episode, where you don't have that conversational tone. You sound like you are reading off a piece of paper, and the tone and inflection in your voice can kind of get boring. That is a risk that happens. So if you are scripting, make sure that you bring that personality. every once in a while, maybe every couple paragraphs, have a little space to just riff, to just share your personality a little bit as well. Share those thoughts that come up in your head, and that'll help keep that flow going for your episode. Now, the third method I definitely avoid at all costs, and I have seen this go really, really bad in the past with some of my clients, and that is to try and memorize your episode before you record it. So first off, for those of you who batch record your episodes, you record more than one episode at a time, the idea of memorizing it just is an impossibility. So if you're batch recording your content, I do not at all advise trying to memorize your content. On the other hand, if you're just recording one episode once in a while, try to ask yourself why you need to memorize it over either writing it down as a script and reading it off the script or writing your bullet points. There's two different things. I feel like if you want to be a person who memorizes and you look at those two other options, what's probably going through your head is if you look over at the world of scripting and writing your script down and then reading off your script, I feel like people are worried that they're going to sound too scripted, that they're not going to be animated enough, they're not going to have that personality. On the other hand, I feel like when those who are trying to memorize are now looking at bullet points, they worry that they aren't a master of their subject enough to be able to riff. And I totally was there in my podcasting history. I feel ya. So I fully, my advice, I should say, is that I think you guys should start doing bullet points. That is where I think the most personality comes out, and you become the most familiar and comfortable with your content. So go out there and try it, my friends. And also, if you're looking at the camera or your microphone and you're saying, this personality is really not having an easy time getting out of my mind or out of my body into my podcast episode, well, definitely join us in the visibility hacking community for the Confidence and Conversions Challenge. There is so many great action points that are going to help bring that personality out so that you can start connecting with your dream customers regardless of what industry or niche you find yourself in. It's going to be absolutely incredible, and it's absolutely free. Click the links down below. Visit us at visibilityhacking.com/cameraconfidence, and you can join too. I can't wait to see you guys in the challenge. In the meantime, enjoy one of these videos, and I'll see you again soon. Remember, I love you, and be excellent to each other.